Good
Want me to
evening.
start and talk?
Oh, I'll kick this off.
Okay.
Um, I just want to welcome everyone to our first community conversation. And this is Uniting for Kids and our first featured guest, Don Perl. And Don Perl comes to us from Greeley, Colorado. He's a professor of Hispanic Studies at the University of Northern Colorado. And we are so thrilled because today, on the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., January 18th, this marks the 15th anniversary that Don Perl refused to administer the first high-stakes testing in Colorado that tied test scores to school ratings. And so, Don, just such a privilege. Thank you very much for joining us. Don and I have worked together since 2004, and just really extraordinary activist and educator and civil rights leader. So it's a privilege. Thank you for kicking off our community conversation series.
Well, Angela, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be here, flattered too.
And let's introduce Kayla, who's also a Uniting for Kids member and has driven to Greeley to help assist you. So Kayla, just give us a wave there too.
Kayla's really making this happen, you know.
That's right. It's a team effort. So Don, just tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be the father of the opt-out movement.
Okay. Well, I think, first of all, I want to say there are so many people involved in this. There's so many people who are speaking out and acting to bring to the attention of the public the fraud that is high-stakes standardized testing. So I came off, it was September 2000, I came off a sabbatical and came back to the school. It'd been a year since I had been there, and the atmosphere at school had changed so much in the year. And the entire school was in a frenzy about preparing for high-stakes standardized testing. So I took some time. Intuitively, I thought it was wrong. So I took some time and did a lot of investigation, a lot of reading, and the more I read, the more I realized that this was indeed a fraud, and it was perpetrated by corporate enterprise. It's not necessary for me to go back over all the reading that I did, but just to bring you up to that day of January 16, 2001, to tell you a little bit about the demographics of my class. John Evans in those days was about 50% Latino, and 50% of those students, those Latino students, spoke Spanish at home. And the first question that I raised to myself is, how can we give this test in English to these students who, yes, they spoke English on the playground, but it was certainly not their language to take an academic test? And how could I look at myself in the mirror, call myself a teacher, and administer this test? So after a lot of anxiety well, a lot of thought, I simply decided that this was time to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Whatever happens, happens. Let the chips fall where they may. And so on this day, was actually January 16th, 2001, I wrote a letter to the superintendent of schools. Actually, I have a copy of it here, which simply says, and I'll just summarize it really quickly. And I state, the more I have researched the issue of high-stakes standardized testing, the more I've come to the realization that these tests are, one, antithetical to the egalitarian premise of public schools, and they undermine the dignity of the teaching profession. Regarding the first issue, students who fare well on these tests have a literary background. They're from Western European professional or middle-class families, and thus the tests, what they do is further polarize our already polarized community. Minority students students whose language is other than English are disadvantaged from the moment they bubble in their names. And I recounted also the fact that I had read The Manufactured Crisis, Myths and Fraud, and the Attack on America's Public Schools. The more I read, the more I saw that it was money that was controlling education, which is to be a public trust. And we were letting corporations like Pearson and McGraw-Hill control what was happening in our classrooms. What could be more malpractice than that? So then, regarding issue number 2, the undermining of the teaching profession, and I think it exists to this day. There seems to be this underlying concept that all teachers need is a manual to follow, and all will go well in the classroom. So we need to understand that the makeup of every classroom is different. Teaching is an art, it's a science, it's a calling, and all of that defies a lockstep manual.
Yeah.
No test can teach citizenship, or cooperation, or compassion. And we in the classroom, we strive to develop thoughtful and meaningful assessments that connect curricula with individual learning styles, that bring out the best in our students, that engage them and humanize them. So that was essentially the gist of my letter, and it's just fantastic, I will say, that here it is 15 years later that we're still involved in this mission. We're still involved in this movement. And what has changed? I could talk a little bit about what I have seen change.
What do you, and Don, if you don't mind, share a little bit about what happened after you opted out, refused to administer the test.
Well, it was a little bit like the world crashed in. There was hate mail. There were threats. I was suspended for the 2 weeks. Think of this, Angela. The test was administered for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I keep repeating that. The bar exam doesn't take that long. So another teacher came in and administered the test. I was not to be in the building, and I was suspended for those 2 weeks. When I got back to school, and you can interrupt me at any time, but when I got back to school, the atmosphere was so charged. My colleagues avoided me. This was so new to me. I just didn't anticipate this at all, that I had to make this my last year. So 2001 was the year that I decided that I couldn't teach at this level anymore, just because the atmosphere at school was so charged. There were some other details that I could go into. The superintendent called me into his office to interview me and to deal with the boycott. I'll always remember his trying to operate the tape recorder from his office in his surroundings, and his nervousness was so obvious. There I was on his ground. So there was something going on in his head and his heart. He knew that there was something wrong with this testing, yet he conformed. So that was something that I always remember.
He conformed, as so many have. Why do you think, I have to ask this honestly, Don, why do you think the educators, many of who've come to the same conclusion that you have, recognizing that for kids that have learning disabilities, for children who have, mental health and anxiety disorders, for children that are just not the standardized, fits-all, one-size norm, that this test really unfairly measures them and judges them, and yet there are many educators that go along with it and defend that. And what's your thinking along those lines?
I think this is the tragedy of our profession, that what goes on in the coffee room where people do the complaining and what goes on in real life are two different things. And I think essentially teachers are afraid. They're afraid if they do speak out, they're going to be consequences, that they cannot handle the consequences. And so they will put their heads down and say, well, my hands are tied. I can't do anything about this. Who am I? I am just a teacher. And I think that has something to do with a lack of self-respect, a lack of respect for their profession. And they also do not realize that they do have power, particularly in numbers, that if they work together, if they are of a common, let them find a common ground of something that they can agree on and forward that, and things will change. And things really have changed. You know, I've noticed that in Uniting for Kids, Peggy Robertson has done wonders in bringing to the attention of the public what a fraud this is. And I think there are a number of teachers now who are tentatively speaking out. More has to happen. More has to happen. And I think also, I'm really glad you asked me that, Angela, because I think more has to happen with the teachers' associations. Teachers' associations have only recently, in their bulletins, come forward and said, yes, standardized testing is abominable, is a fraud. And if you just read their bulletins and their magazines, it looks like they're in the forefront of the movement, when in fact they're just falling in line. They could do so much more pedagogically. They could do so much more to inspire the rank and file to, okay, speak out, let us strike. They did this in Chicago. Teachers strike in Chicago, I think, was 2012. Had a really great impact on the public education system in Chicago. So the more teachers can get together, the more that they can rally their forces and find one issue that they agree on, then the more they will impact their profession positively.
So I know your story. You did more than just opt out. You also carried a petition to the state to get on the ballot, and talk about that process a little bit.
Yeah, that was very interesting too. So after my boycott, I was very naive. I just thought all I have to do is spread the word, and people little by little they'll get the picture, and we can change public policy. We can change educational policy for the better. Well, so I would go to these festivals with a little stand in my brochure, and somebody came up to me. It was the fall of 2003. A colleague came up to me and said, "Hey, Don, this is going to go nowhere. You should try to get this on the ballot." So, well, that planted a seed in my head, and so I got together with a couple of colleagues, and we called the attorney, I can't remember specifically his title. What do we have to do to get a measure on the ballot? I was invited to a number of meetings by the Legislative Council, and in March of 2004, we presented the language for the elimination of CSAP. So we put the elimination of CSAP on the ballot. Essentially, all we had to do was come up with one particular item for approval. And so our ballot initiative was approved. It was early March of 2004. Again, I was naive, and I thought, well, we can make this happen. We need something like 65,000 signatures. No, 85,000 signatures, but there are 65,000 teachers in the state of Colorado. There were then. So I got in touch with our Teachers Association. I remembered reading in their bulletins, every time a bulletin came out, there was very strong language against CSAP testing. And so I spoke to the vice president, his name is escaping me. I also spoke to Brady, and I said, you know, we've done your work for you. We have a ballot initiative. All we need to do is get teachers together, sign the ballot initiative, and we can get this on the ballot. This was on a phone conversation. Followed a very long pause. A very long pause. I thought perhaps we had been disconnected. And finally I said, well, are you still there? Who's Brady? He said, Don, we cannot forward this ballot initiative. we can make mention of it in our bulletin, but we cannot forward it. So now it was my turn to be totally silent. I just was aghast. How can you do this, I asked. How can you do this when you know what a fraud it is? And then the answer was really quiet. It's just politics, just politics. So then we did, on the threads of a shoestring, try to get as many signatures as possible. We got, I'll always remember the number, 12,485 signatures, far cry from the 5,000 we would need. But anyway, that was a point of departure. And so from that came the billboard campaign. Also from that came just more realization of the horrors of high-stakes standardized testing, and in fact, that something could be done about it. So that's sort of a synopsis of that aspect.
A lot of people say, I mean, the argument that has really forwarded standardized testing is that if you don't have a measure, then we don't know how our children are doing. And talk about what education looked like before standardized testing and before the whole emphasis on learning and teaching was about measuring and assessment. What did the classroom look like before that?
Well, that's really a wonderful question because I can see my classroom. I taught English and I taught Spanish. So I remember, it was maybe 1999. There was this large textbook that we were to use in our English classes. I went to the principal and I said, this textbook, first of all, it's too big for the students. They're not going to take it with them. And for particularly the Mexican kids, the boys, I mean, you have to be culturally aware here. Boys don't want the world to know that they're reading. So for them to have this big textbook, well, it's just so out of place for them. But they will read little novels. In fact, I can remember a guy coming to me and looking around, making sure nobody was looking at him, and he said to me, Mr. Perl, that book, Night, do you have an extra copy? And yeah, I have an extra copy. I gave him the copy, and he put it in his shirt. He didn't want anybody to know he was taking the book home to read. Well, this is fine. If they want to take a book home in their shirt, that's fine. And we have a number of novels that are readable, more than readable, that are engaging and food for thought. So I said to the principal, let's buy these novels. And she said, no, we're going to go with this textbook because, of course, it has to do with corporate enterprise. It was a McGraw-Hill textbook. So I said, I'm not going to teach from that textbook. Well, she said, I don't know what you're going to do for books. So I got in touch with some of the book publishers who did these paperback books. We could get Romeo and Juliet in the paperback form. We could get A Day No Pigs Would Die, The Good Earth, a number of other books. After the First Death, I can remember those books. We could get them in paperback form. And so I bought them. And I said to my students, okay, we're going to use these books, but you've got to be really careful with them because I have bought them. And so if you would please, yes, read them, enjoy them. Don't mark in them, bring them back so I can use them the next semester. They all came back in almost perfect condition. It was a heartwarmer to me. Mm-hmm. So yes, we can do things. We could do things, and I could teach pretty much what I thought was appropriate pedagogically. The idea is, though, that students are engaged, that they come to class and they can talk about what they read, they can engage in conversation. I'll tell you one story, too. So we read The Good Earth. There is a chapter in The Good Earth where we're not is the mom has her third child. Of course she has
Don,
yes.
We have a little bit of an interruption there.
Okay.
And so can you start from you were describing a section of The Good Earth. If you could just start over right there. Okay. Your audio faded just a bit.
All right. So there isn't a section in The Good Earth Perl Buck novel in which this Chinese family, very poor, there's another child on the way. And of course the child is to be birthed in another room far away from the men. And we hear the child cry, and then we hear silence. Well, I guess we hear silence. There's silence. And then Olan comes out of that inner room and she says, the child is dead. So I said to the students, that is the context. Now, what do you think? Is this euthanasia? And what do you think about euthanasia? These are 15-year-old adolescents. We engaged in a conversation of the morality of euthanasia. It was just a heartwarmer to me. The principal walked in and sat and listened to that conversation. I thought she would be as impressed as I was about different points of view being presented, the morality of euthanasia, did it actually happen? And after class, she had one question for me. Where is this on the standards? Left me absolutely speechless. So when you're talking about things that are to be measured, well, we need to measure our students. Einstein is quoted as saying, many things that can be counted don't count, and many things that count can't be counted. This is one thing. This conversation, 15-year-olds are having an interchange of ideas about the morality of euthanasia. How can we count that? Except to know these are human beings developing.
I think the challenge with standardization and high-stakes testing and really approaching schools from this standpoint of what we can't measure, we can't improve, and yet detaching entirely from the humanity is at the core of that. And yet we never hear that conversation. We're not talking about the humanity. We're not talking about the whole child. We don't have conversations about issues of morality, as you're talking about. We're very polarized on those issues, but we're not having those conversations. And so what do you think? I mean, now we're 15 years into standardized testing. And my question to you is, where do you think this leads? What is the end result of this overemphasis and this obsession with standardized test scores?
See, I'm very hopeful, Angela. I'm very hopeful. Some things have happened. So, for example, Judy Solano was very, very brave and forceful and forwarded legislation to allow parents, it's even stronger than that, to see to it that parents had the right and knew that they could exempt their children from high-stakes standardized testing. This was a very important piece of legislation. Yes, it got ultimately vetoed by Ritter, but nonetheless, these are very important steps. That was a very important step. What you have done to organize and work with legislators is very important too, and to pass the word about what are we doing in public education. Public education is a public trust. And that we invite everybody, we embrace everyone, and that is our strength. So what you have done is very important too. These are little drops that go a long way. Peggy Robertson for Uniting for Kids, what she has done.
United Opt-Out.
United Opt-Out.
Yes.
Thank you. This is also critical, and it just is painfully slow. We want to see changes happen, well, yesterday.
Yeah.
However, movements like this, where we're working towards alert the public of the importance of education as a public trust, the importance of humanizing our public policies, our education policies, these are very painful and very slow movements. But I'm very hopeful that ultimately we are going to have public policies, educational policies that do better reflect the importance of recognizing and honoring our humanity. I want to say this. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to get to a couple of questions from our other United members. But just briefly, I remember that McGraw-Hill approached you and they
Very
wanted
well.
to market some materials at the University of Northern Colorado. And you, once again, took a very strong position with McGraw-Hill, and if you could just share that story as well, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, in our Hispanic Studies department, I went to our department chair and I asked her that we not use any materials from McGraw-Hill. She was very sensitive, that's Professor Joy Landeta. She was very sensitive to the request. She honored it, and she promoted our book, Educational Courage, Resisting the Ambush of Public Education. Not only that, a couple of years after that, I approached her again about Pearson, saying we don't want to buy any materials from Pearson. So that she agreed too. So we don't use any text from Pearson. We don't use any text from McGraw-Hill. And these also, they're little drops in the bucket, but these count. And it's amazing to me how reactive McGraw-Hill and Pearson were. They got in touch with me. They tried to woo me. Who am I? I teach my Spanish classes, yet there's an Achilles heel there. They wanted to know why. They wanted to, well, literally wine and dine me and sell me their product. I find that very interesting, and there's got to be an Achilles heel there, that they're very concerned that this movement is going to affect their business, their bottom line, which essentially is all they think about.
Right.
You know.
Which we learned later because McGraw-Hill sold their education department. I think it was for $5 billion. It was an extraordinary amount. And then 6 months later, the entire organization was brought up on fraud charges by the Justice Department. So, you know, that idea of having a test hold our teachers and our schools and our children accountable, instead of the public and those communities themselves, it's just so indicative of the disaster and the fraud that you speak about. So I so appreciate all of your leadership, Don. You provided several examples around really how to challenge this. Do we have any questions from our members, our Uniting for Kids members, that you'd like to pose to Don?
Yeah, I have one thing that I'd like to ask. I mean, you've been talking a lot about teachers, you know, because you are a teacher. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. My name's Eve. By the way, I'm Eve Cohen. Yes, I just realized I hadn't. I'm Eve Cohen.
We can only see half of you.
You can only see half of me.
There we go. Oh.
Okay. Sorry, I'm on my cell phone.
Okay.
So you talked about teachers, and you are a teacher, and how you've been trying to get teachers involved. But I'm not a teacher, and I'm a parent, and I've been really trying to get parents involved in this issue. And I've been noticing sort of two things, that parents who are most affected, parents of kids that are in poverty or non-native English speakers, it's very difficult sometimes to get them really involved in this particular issue. And parents that are wealthy and English speakers don't care because their kids are doing fine and they don't see why it's a problem. So I guess my question to you is, you know, how do you make both sets of parents care enough to do something? And where do you think the key is? Do you think the key is in trying to engage people who are most severely affected, or, you know, people who don't feel that they are?
Wow. Well, I have agonized over this question myself. So what you're saying is right on. Those parents of minority children, those parents of children whose language is other than English, they're just glad to be in the United States.
Right, and have their kids in school.
And have the kids in school, right. But also they come from a culture, this has been my experience, they come from a culture that really respects teachers, really respects the educational program, and thinks that teachers must know better than they know. So there's an incredible barrier to try to educate those parents to say, you know what, your teachers may not know better, or if they do know better, they're not acting on their best instincts or best, oh, let us say they're most professional, making the most professional decisions. So how do you break that barrier? And that, wow, first of all, it's possible. It is possible. And because every now and then a student will come forward. I did have some students come forward who were native Spanish speakers in Hispanic studies, and they were taking classes, and they would come to my office. 3 or 4 of them came to my office and asked, how can we opt out my younger sister? How can I opt out my cousin? I mean, that's all family to them. And so I was always impressed when they did come forward, and I would say, spread the word, because we need you. We need you to spread the word because you are in the community, and you know what's going on. You are well educated, and you need to talk to your colleagues, you need to talk to your uncles and aunts, and so that they know too. Start spreading the word. So how does it happen? Sometimes things just happen if we keep working at it. Something magical, I have great faith in that. Something magical happens if you keep working at something. And even if one other parent gets the idea, wait a minute, that this is wrong, and I am going to take an important, brave step, and I'm going to opt my children out. I'm thinking of Sylvia Martinez here in Greeley. She has always been very brave about opting her children out, and she comes from a community that is native Spanish speaking. She met with a lot of resistance to doing that, and yet she was very thoughtful, very well read, and was a leader in it, and inspired others. It doesn't really answer your question. I just think it comes down to the individual and how can we make good things happen. Depends upon the leadership in the community. Okay, going to the other side, about the middle class or upper middle class parents who don't really care. I think they do care. I just don't think they know that they care. So how do we inspire them to see that what's good for others, what's good for public education is good for everyone? How do we get them to see that? Because they are, as Angela said, they are polarized. They're in their marginalized communities. They have this great fear. Fear is an incredible factor here. Fear of stretching their envelopes. And how do we make that happen? At some level, I think they want to, but fear stands in their way. So again, what we do in the community, whatever we do in the community to pass the word about the fraud of high-stakes standardized testing, about the involvement of a corporate enterprise in taking over a public trust, whatever we can do to pass that word is a positive thing. And ultimately, something magical happens.
Don, we're at the end of our time. Is there anything else? And I'll just add this too, that part of providing examples around this, you've been a tremendous example for all of us educators, parents, citizens, students, and that when you stand in the face of injustice, what you do is you stand up and challenge it right back. And so I think being an example is one area that we all strive, and then also to help educate and spread the word, because families are busy, and this issue is complex, and it's disguised so that it's advertised as what's in the interest of schools and children, and yet we know it's counter to the interests of children and communities. And so we've got the Billboard campaign that has been an annual event, and we're happy to be partnering with the Coalition for Better Education, and Uniting for Kids will be carrying that forward. We have a GoFundMe campaign that's been initiated by Stephanie Fuhr. And you can find out about that campaign both on our website, Uniting for Kids, and also on our Facebook page. So For those that are interested in helping advance the movement, please make a donation. Or we will have 4 ads that you can choose from, and you can decide to finance one of those billboards or those bus benches in your community. So please visit our website. Don, any final words for our group?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm so honored to be here and so honored that all of you are here, that I've been able to pass this word. It's a great privilege for me. I wanted to just say a couple of things too as we end. So I think essentially we are here to protect and advance public education. Public education is a public trust. And we are not to succumb to corporate interests who see everything, every human endeavor as measurable, who only think about the bottom line. We are thinking about the advancement, essentially we're thinking of the advancement of our next generation. We want better things for humanity, and we are faced with incredible challenges on our planet. What more important area to advance than public education? What more important area than the importance of our working together, the importance of our learning about each other, our humanizing each other? Whatever little bit we can do as parents, as teachers, whatever we can do to advance that concept that we are here to advance public education, we are here to humanize, whatever we can do is positive. And let's always think, okay, I can't do everything, but I can do one little thing, and let me decide what one little thing it is that I want to do to be a part of the humanizing process. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Don. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful first call, first community conversation. So thank you for once again leading the way.
Thank you too, Angela, for being such a leader in this. Yay!
Art, can you take us off